seems to display of courage, skill, nerve, grace, and stupidity.
I'll do you for that. Oh, what? Come here. What are you going to do, bleed on me? I'm invincible. You're a loony. The Black Knight always triumphs.
Roundtable Live, Monday through Friday, 1 a.m. till 4 a.m. Eastern Time. Bring your mind, bring your ideas, bring your voice. King Arthur had nothing on us here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com.
Enjoy your extra big-ass fries.
You didn't give me no fries. I got an empty box.
Would you like another?
Extra big-ass fries.
I said I didn't get any.
Thank you. Your account has been charged. Your balance is 0. Please come back when you can afford to make a purchase.
No.
I'm sorry you're having
Come
trouble.
on. My kids are starving.
Thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio. Here at Revolution Radio, we believe in freedom of ideas, freedom of speech, but above all, we believe in freedom of existence through self-reliance. This station is 100% listener-supported, and as a fundraising promotion, I have a kick-ass free gift for a $100 donation. 35,000 seeds. 25 years in the freezer. Long-term storable, 54 different varieties. So if food prices go crazy, the shit hits the fan, or if you just want to save tons of money every year by creating your own food like I do, grab our seed pack special. Just look for the banner on the homepage at freedomslips.com. Don't be a statistic. Don't be part of the problem. Be part of the solution. We need, as humans, to start taking care of ourselves and not depending on the megacorps to provide unhealthy, nasty food. Included in this package is also a DVD with 900 survival and off-grid living documents and the offline home canning, how to do everything website, all on the DVD. So when you're growing all that food, you know how to can it, store it, preserve it, etc. with all these documents. So thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I hope that you will pick up this package and start learning to be free. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps and freedom is one seed that needs to be planted.
What we do in life? It goes in eternity.
All right, let's get it going. Are you ready? Are you ready? Let's go! Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. It is 10 p.m. Thursday evening, and we are here live on Studio A. Yeah, you've waited all week for the most cutting-edge topics and guests, and now it is time to deliver. That's right, it's the Stephen D. Kelley Show with your host, Stephen D. Kelley.
Oh my gosh! I interrupted my theme music. Holy moly! I was coughing there. Hello, everybody. Oh, I got a little echo. That must be Scott, my guest. All right, Scott, if you're there, try to see if you can close off your, turn down your volume or adjust your monitor speakers. All right, everybody, welcome to the show. This is another edition of the Stephen D. Kelley Show. I'm very happy to be here. I have a very good guest. I'm looking forward to this show. We've got to have a lot to talk about, and then hopefully he's going to blow your mind with some really cool information. Be advised, I have a dying kitty, and I'm doing my best to keep keep my wits about me tonight, because it's not a good time right now. But fortunately, he didn't pass right before the show, so I don't have to be freaking out right now. So anyway, enough about that. Welcome to Revolution Radio. This is the largest listener-supported alternative media station on the internet, and I am very proud to have a show here in prime time, and I am very proud to have done what I can do to help grow this station into what it is today. And we owe everything to you, the listener, and believe it or not, as big as we are and as many people as we have involved in this station and as much work as we do, we are entirely entirely dependent on your donations. We have a relatively small budget. It's only about $1,900 a month. And as I look right now, it says that we've raised about $550, and we have 21 days left to go. We need to do a little bit better than that, so if you guys can help me out, this is prime time, so hopefully there's a lot of people listening, and if you can break loose just a couple bucks, a euro, a Deutschmark, whatever the heck, it's all good. Please go to our site support page at www.freedomslips.com. Hit that button and do what you can. There's no such thing as a small donation. It's all very, very helpful. We are in the truth business at this network. It can be entertaining, but the main thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to shake people out there and wake them up and give them information that they are not going to get anyplace else. That's why I have guests like I have tonight. And this is a very important that the power of the truth, the power of the word of the truth is like a fire, and you listening right now, you can help us immensely just by telling your friends, family, anybody around you, coworkers, tell them about this station, tell them about what you've heard, and please ask them to join us and do what you can to help us increase our listenership, because we are doing this out of love and we are doing this for our fellow man, and it's all about trying to get the word out there. So you are part of this process, and if you can help us to reach more and more people and expand our reach and get the truth out there and the message out there, it's a very, very noble thing that you do. And those of you that help us economically, you are also saints in the movement of truth, and we can never say thank you enough. So there's only a small handful of people that actually do donate, but those of you that do, your work is very incredible, and all of us here at Revolution Radio are extremely thankful and beholden to you for your generosity and help. That being said, I also want to remind people we have a very active chat room. If you are listening via the computer, if you're on your PC or something as opposed to an iPhone, I know at least half of the people out there are listening to this show on their phones and their car radios and what have you, so that obviously they can't, they don't have a keyboard in front of them, they can't join the chat room. But if you can, please do. We have a lot of friends in the chat room. It's a great place to meet people and to join our community and join our family, so I want to ask you to do that. I also want to remind you that we have a Facebook page that is growing. It's growing slowly, but it is growing, and it's very easy to find on Facebook. Again, it's www.facebook.com/Freedom Slips. We're just about hitting 3,400 people. We're working very hard to grow this page, and we're going to try to get more and more of the hosts involved, because right now there's only a handful of the 70-something hosts that we have on this network that are actually using this Facebook page, so hopefully we can expand that. And a lot of us, social media is very big. I'm very big on social media. I don't have a web page, but I do have the Facebook page. I've got 400, or I think it's 4,200, something like that, people. So I have room for a lot more people on there. If you'd like to join me on Facebook, I encourage you to do that. Please do. Obviously, it's my name, Stephen D. Kelley, if you can do that. And I also recommend, if you can remember my name, of course, Kelley, Stephen, Steven. Google my name, because if you Google my name, the first thing that will come up will be the Facebook page, and you'll also see links to all of the YouTube videos of the various shows that we have done, and we've had some incredible guests over the last year, and so much of that information is just so pertinent today still. And I really encourage you to go at your leisure and visit the Facebook page and look at that. Typically, we get these shows that we do here up on Facebook within 24 hours, usually, depending on the how busy the people are that are actually doing those adding. But and of course, much more people listen to the show live than actually view it on Facebook. So, but at the same time, that is an archive, and we do want to promote that. There's lots of other things that I want to try to promote, but this is not about me tonight. Obviously, I have a book. I'll bring that up sometime later, and I want to, encourage people to buy my book, of course. But right now, my guest tonight is a Mr. Scott Rickard, and Scott is a intelligence linguist and analyst. I hope I got that right. And he has been involved with the NSA and various organizations. And this man is a wealth of information. He is a total insider, but he's one of us. As a linguist, he speaks quite a few languages, and naturally this makes him very valuable to the media. He has appeared many, many times on very prominent media outlets, usually in Europe and other countries other than, this is his first time here at Revolution Radio. He didn't even know about us, so I'm happy to introduce him to the network. And as with any of my valuable guests, I want to advise my fellow hosts that this is a man that you will want to connect to and perhaps try to get on the other shows here at Revolution Radio, because obviously everybody, 70-something hosts, I don't get the audience of every host out there, and so we can certainly share these guests. Well, I'm going to bring Scott in, and I'm going to ask him to tell us a little bit about himself. And are you there, Scott?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful. All right. Now, Scott, of course, you're an intelligent guy, and you have some very, very technical knowledge and some experience with some classified systems and technologies used in the surveillance and intelligence community. A lot of what you talk about, what we talk about, I may know about it, but we have to assume that the listeners out there are newbies, and so it's important that we try to explain when we start dropping names and rattling off acronyms. Please help me out and try to explain it in such a way that the listeners who are oblivious to everything can understand. And obviously, a lot of our audience is outside of the United States. Obviously, we have English-speaking listeners, but at the same time, a lot of the events that take place here in the U.S. are completely foreign to a large portion of our listeners. So hopefully, we'll be able to make this all understandable for everybody. So, Scott, the first thing I would like you to do is go back to the beginning, if you will, and start with when you first got involved in the work that you're doing right now. If you want to start with your education, a brief bio, and then talk about the first time you got involved with some of these agencies, some of these corporations, whoever it was that you were working with, and if you can, bring us up to where we are tonight. And also, if there was a period during that time or a time during that period where you had a wake-up, that's definitely something that we want to hear about. So go for it.
Okay. Well, hey, thanks for having me on your program, Steve. And got to tell you that I'm pretty excited. I sound like you guys got a heck of a radio program going here, and I didn't realize there were 70 different hosts, and I apologize for not having discovered your network until you contacted me. Mm-hmm. When I started out, I actually started out as an Air Force linguist, and I was lucky enough to go out to Monterey a couple of times and study some foreign languages. I flew in the back RC-135s. It's an intelligence collection platform, and we also operated with the downlink SIG collection platform from the U-2 program. At that time, the aerial reconnaissance was pretty much the only game in town because you didn't have the advancements that we have today in satellites. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have any kind of drones and those types of things. These were all really archaic aircraft, even at the time that I was using them in the 80s. These aircraft were, a lot of them were built in the 50s. So we were at the end of an era there. We had reel-to-reel tapes that were recording things on, believe it or not, on aircraft. So it was a different time and a different space. And then I got lucky and moved on in my career. Worked for a couple of real good contracting organizations at NASA and the Eastern Space Missile Command down in Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center and Patrick Air Force Base. And when I did that, I got introduced to even more good technology. And the technology that was coming out in the commercial space was starting to catch up with the technology that they had in the government space. So, we've, as we've moved on, even since I started working there in the early 90s, 20 years later, it's just a phenomenal leap of technology we've made. Just this conversation we're having today, doing an internet radio show, was unheard of 20 years ago. So, it's an excellent, transition that I had going from, a high-tech, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance environment to building the back-end systems and putting in the network infrastructure for the facilities that were doing those types of activities. And then I moved on and moved into really global infrastructure markets for large corporations and large carriers. A little interesting story, when I went to go look for those jobs when I was leaving really the Department of Defense and NASA network building. I was really building networks and integrating systems for them. I went to go interview for a job up in Atlanta for a company called Concordia Corp. And Concordia Corp was an outsource arm for what at the time was really British Telecom. And British Telecom was trying to make a bid for MCI at the time, and it was shut down actually by the FCC. The FCC said it would be a risk to national security in the early 90s if a foreign nation owned our telecommunications network. And lo and behold, 2 years later, you had basically a bunch of guys lobbying Congress that were in the telecommunications industry, and all of a sudden it wasn't a risk to national security any longer, and Concordia Corp, and everybody knows that British Telecom basically bought MCI and it became WorldCom. So a lot of that transition when they did the deregulation markets really opened up the U.S. market to surveillance to international markets. So we were building a lot of equipment. There was a lot of equipment coming in from overseas manufacturers that were setting up shop in the United States. There was a ton of equipment being built to do surveillance and monitoring from a commercial perspective. There was an organization that they had called the National Security Telecommunication Advisory Council. This council was built of some of the most senior telecommunications engineers and technology engineers in the country. And it was really a lot of high-tech consulting organizations and high-tech technology manufacturing organizations that belonged to that group. At that point, I had transitioned into a startup company that was really founded by an individual who's kind of a, I hate to describe him in a bad way, but he was kind of a cowboy. He did some strange things when we worked together, but needless to say, he was very adventurous. And when I worked for that group, it was very interesting because we had a guy working in our organization who was actually a developer for a mobster named Semyon Mogilevich. Now, Semyon Mogilevich, most people haven't heard of him, but he is basically the number one mobster in the history of the world. He's on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. He's been there since 2002. He is more notorious than Osama bin Laden. He's basically he was supplying the weapons to Osama bin Laden on our behalf. We were his biggest customer. And it's interesting if you look at the history of Semyon Mogilevich. He got his start post World War II when he went in and he basically started talking about how he was going to help the migration of the Jewish faith going down to Israel. So he would take their property on consignment when he was in Russia. He was a Ukrainian Jewish fellow, and he took the consignment of these people's property, and then he was going to sell it and send them the money down when he sold it down into Israel. Well, and what in fact happened is he kept everybody's money, and he basically put everybody in a position where he's stolen all of their property and sold it and became a profit. He built up one of the largest networks of mobsters that the world had ever seen. In fact, it got so big that when he was in the late 70s and early 80s, he was thrown out of Moscow, and he went to Israel. These guys got huge cojones. He went to Israel, and he got his Israeli citizenship. And when the Iron Curtain fell in the Baltics, he went into the Iron Curtain and bought up all the arms manufacturers, and that's when we became his biggest customer, because we were buying Russian-made, actually Eastern Bloc-made Russian equipment and using that in the Afghan war against the Russians, of all people. Now, this gentleman, the only reason I bring him up, it was kind of ironic when I was working at this software company, that these pieces started to come together for me, because I had worked in the intelligence community, I had worked in the security service business alongside a lot of communications environments, and it was interesting to see those pieces on the mobster coming together, because it was easy to put the pieces together and then find out the other links that I had learned when I was working in the really was like an anti-terrorism. It was one of the earlier versions of an anti-terrorism organization. So it was an interesting background to find this guy at the time, and it was interesting to put together the links where this one individual had ties back into think tanks in the United States. He had ties back into banks and money laundering. He had ties into a lot of different drug running that was coming in and out of the United States and in and out of South America, and obviously in and out of Europe and the Eastern Bloc nations. So anybody who's never heard of Semyon Mogilevich, he's a very key individual. There's individuals that he's tied with that are more recent in the news, like Khodorkovsky, like these guys like Poroshenko out of Ukraine. All of the Ukrainian leadership has to do business with Semyon Mogilevich because he's very closely tied to the gas and the oil business in Russia and Ukraine. He has extremely strong network of individuals that he works with across those regions. He provides security. He's very well respected and very heavily feared. And that's one.
Scott, if I can interrupt you just for a second, how does Vladimir Putin get along with this guy? I mean,
well, that's a good question. I mean, when you start talking about the oligarchs, and I would consider him a mobster oligarch. When you start talking about oligarchs, we all our political leaders really don't have a choice of who they deal with and how they deal with them. They deal with them the way that they're told to deal with them. They can't fight these guys. They can't fight the oligarchs. Just like our government is paralyzed by the folks that run the financial and the military and the intelligence organizations. So is Russia. Just because you've worked in the intelligence community, I'd compare, say, Putin to H.W. Bush, where he had worked in the intelligence community. He has better ties back into it, but he doesn't control, all the financial markets. He doesn't control all of the military trade that's going on. He doesn't control all of the intelligence organizations. There are factions and egos and personalities that permeate all those organizations that have family ties, that have financial ties, and those are the real decision makers, because the politicians come and go. But these organizations stay, the bankers, look at Goldman Sachs in the United States. Goldman Sachs has been around since 1867. They control all the debt that goes in and out of the Federal Reserve. They run the Brookings Institute. It is probably one of the most powerful think tanks in Washington, D.C. That think tank will be in Washington, D.C. with the leadership as the administrations come and go, every 4 to 8 years. So these are the individuals that are holding the keys to the kingdom, not the politicians and certainly not the people. So that's really, that goes on in Russia, that goes on in England, that goes on in, Germany. There are individuals that are above the law. There are individuals that are above the politics. And that's what Putin deals with, the same thing that our government deals with.
Now, if we could get back to your bio, okay, so you were working for this individual. You were doing some sort of network or data work for this guy?
No, we had a software developer that had been in his organization. His organization fell apart in 2002 in Budapest because he was indicted by the Securities and Exchange Commissions in both Canada and the United States. And
now, what year was this that you were dealing with these people?
That was 2002 that I discovered it. Around 2003, I started to put together some more of the pieces, started to do some more research on it. A lot of open source stuff. You'd be surprised what you can find in open source about these guys. And then I was able to confirm some of it back and actually inform some of my friends that were still working for the agency. Because the agencies, you have to realize that they're very compartmentalized, and it's like looking through a portal. And even this Snowden guy, they make a big deal about how he stole this most sensitive information. It's such a minute aspect of what he's had access to and exposed. But he's a young guy, and he was over embellished. He over embellished. He was over excited about what he thought he had, and it wasn't. Even the incoming director of the NSA has said that it's not really going to do that much damage to us. What he actually stole wasn't really that damaging at all, to be honest with you. And I totally agree with that. It's stuff that most people knew already.
Well, bringing up the NSA, eventually, if we can move on from 2002 here, did you actually get involved with the NSA, or what's?
That was prior to that. Yeah, that was back in the 80s, and I was working with them. I'd kind of skipped past that. That was that was part of the intelligence community. I started in 1980. And I finished in the late 80s and left, and then went to go work for contractors, and worked for contractors mostly in and around D.C. and in and around the NASA environment. And then when I left that, I went to go work in the commercial space for really government projects, but projects with companies like Comcast, and project with companies like British Telecom. These companies are just an extended arm. When they talk about in the news, for example, how they're going to minimize the bulk data and just leave it with the vendors. Well, that's the vendors are AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint. They just go and request that information, and instead of having to request it, they were just getting it on demand, without any, it's just a constant feed. But to be truthful with you, that information is already accessible to the intelligence community before it's given to the government. For example, Amdocs. Amdocs is an Israeli intelligence company that handles a lot of the building mediation software for all of the telephone companies. So they already have that information. Mossad has access to that information before they give it to the NSA. So that ought to tell you something. And if you read some of the more recent edicts, the intelligence community has already given the Mossad a blank check when it comes to dealing with American intelligence. They've given them the right to do surveillance against Americans on the NSA's behalf. So that's
wasn't Echelon located in Israel?
Well, Echelon did have there is a part of Echelon was in Israel for some of the collection in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. That was one of the earlier systems. Actually, that whistle was blown, almost 20 years ago. When actually it was in the 80s. It was probably 30 years ago.
We love Jesus.
What's that?
We love Jesus.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just giving you a hard time. Scott, I also understand that all of this data collection involved in the Obamacare, and for years and years they were trying to get all of the data from our health records based in Israel too, which is kind of scary when you think about the HIPAA aspects.
Well, I mean, to be brutally honest with you, I mean, there's no shortage of when they call it the Five Eyes, they never really mention Israel. But Israel, give you an example, Booz Allen Hamilton is probably one of the largest and most connected, contracting organizations for the U.S. government intelligence environment. And does that kind, the dual horn devil. He basically was a senior vice president there, and that's it's a farming ground for foreign intelligence intervention into American information systems, American intelligence environments. There's a lot of individuals who will tell you when an Israeli based intelligence group or team comes into the Pentagon, they won't even go through security checks. They demand to see who they want to see, and they say they aren't required to even go through the standard security checks that all Americans have to go through. So it's a pretty it's a very unsafe environment for American sovereignty, and we've really passed the keys to the kingdom, to a foreign intelligence organization that is very untrustworthy.
That sounds like treason. Well,
it is treason.
Yeah, it sure is. We have so much to talk about. I got to tell you, Scott, right now, you're coming back, okay? I got to have you back. We were already 30 minutes into the show, and I can tell right now we aren't even going to get near talking about everything that we want to talk about. Okay. So let's get back into your resume, your bio, if we can. I want to get up into the the NSA stuff. If we, what's next?
Well, so really, the NSA component was, most of the stuff that I worked on then is pretty arcane. What's interesting is that a lot of the tactics are exactly the same, but the capacity is just gone out the roof. Give you a sort of a visual perspective. What was the size of almost a truck tire? We could fit maybe 20 to 30 megabyte on back in the early 80s. And now, you can, walk around with a 128 gigabyte, flash drive and rip off everything from work that you need that you thought was cool and could take home. If you listen to potentially, let's say, Anthony Schaefer, he's a guy from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Anthony talks about during Able Danger, where they destroyed over 2 terabyte of data that they had on the Saudis that were the hijackers, the 19 hijackers. So that was there's a huge amount of data out there, and when I hear like Snowden talking about it's a haystack and you can't sift through it and those types of things, we're collecting too much. Well, maybe for him. But there's individuals that understand the metadata. There's individuals that are a lot smarter than him. He was, definitely not one of the smartest guys at the intelligence community. He's an administrator kid that, had some decent jobs, and they pay good. Trust me, those guys will pay, and the reason they pay good is they want people to want that money. I mean, I've got friends that are all getting close to retirement. They all feel the same way. They all know something's wrong, but nobody says a thing because they're like, "Oh, I'm not going to jeopardize my my pension." I mean, that's
ain't that the truth, right?
Yeah. So it's hush money.
Yeah. Souls have prices, right?
They do. So I ended up really, leaving the agency. Kind of a bit disenchanted. I came through about the same time as the Ali North Iran-Contra component. We all saw that it was bold-faced lying. Everybody in the intelligence community knew it that was paying attention. And we all looked at each other and went, boy, these guys are a bunch of liars. And some of the guys that I worked with actually turned state's evidence into the Justice Department that was incredibly damning and certainly implicated up to the office of the president. So, and that was never brought, out of the Justice Department. That was swept under the rug. So that was kind of disenchanting, and I came down to Florida and I started to work for the Eastern Space Missile Command, and that was. It was almost as if, I said, well, enough is enough, and I'm done with it. And there was really nothing like this. You couldn't go on a radio show and have these kind of conversations. Nobody would listen for the first place, and everybody would say you were crazy. You're making it up. It's a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, What they used to tell me, they said that I was a pathological liar.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, and so here I am living in Florida. I have great jobs, making good money, doing what I'm supposed to do, and I came. I got lucky, and I was living on the beach and lo and behold, this guy that lived across the street on the other side of the A1A kept coming to the beach, and I was talking to him, and turns out that his father was the number one arms dealer for the United States at the time that I was working at the agency. His father was doing a lot of business with Adnan Khashoggi. Adnan Khashoggi was the number one arms dealer for Saudi Arabia. And it turns out that his father was the blue-eyed, blonde-haired angel of death. That's how he's referred to. And I don't know if you remember that Nicolas Cage movie, but basically that movie was somewhat based upon my buddy's father's life.
Lord of War, was it?
Lord of War, yeah.
Lord of War, great movie, yeah.
Yeah, so, and that was the kind of things that, people did and people still do. I mean, there's all kinds of people that have made just tons of money. There are contractors working in D.C. that I know today who take South American and African individuals, pay them $1,000 a month, and charge the U.S. government anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 a month, and then when they're done with them, they ship them back to their home country. And whether they've got an arm blown off or not, there's no VA for these guys. They go back to their own country, and that's it. They're expendable. And these contractors are making $9,000 to $20,000 a month off these guys. They're basically pimping them out in these wars that we're doing in Afghanistan and Iraq and so on and so forth. And it's a huge business. It's extremely profitable. We have built up, from a humanity perspective, we have really built up one of the largest, most effective war machines. And I was actually in an argument, or supposed to be a debate, with Michael Barrett. He's a professor from George Washington University. I was on Crosstalk last week, and he's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations.
And Crosstalk is a Fox News? Or?
Crosstalk is a Russian television program with Peter Lavelle. He's
RT.
RT, yeah. It's actually, I like RT. A lot of people have been steered wrong on that. Told I have nothing to do with Russia. Just as a disclaimer, they're just as dysfunctional as the United States, but they're on a lot smaller scale. The folks in RT, they are given a lot of freedom. If you look at the American television, it's a corporate television network. I mean, these guys, they don't even know what they're talking about most of the time. They're reading from cards. They don't know who their guests really are. They're just going with a theme, and they're almost like actors. You might as well be watching Spring.
They are actors, or talking heads, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they really don't even know what they're talking about most of the time. So, Diane Sawyer, a good example of that this week. I don't know if you caught that this week, but she was talking about the bombing of Israel, but then they were putting up photographs of the bombing of Israel, and these were all the people suffering in Palestine. She was giving the Palestinian photographs talking about the suffering in Israel.
Yeah, I heard
and I thought, well, how about that? I hope that was done by accident, but who knows? So, and it's really disingenuous, and that's kind of one of the things that I saw when I was working at the agency as well, is that I saw that the news was being very dishonest, and it's been that way. It was designed to do that. Edward Bernays, you may be familiar with him from the early '90s, wrote a book called Propaganda, and the book was basically how to use media to control societies. And that book was adopted by Joseph Goebbels. It was adopted by Joseph Stalin. It was adopted by Roosevelt. Everybody was like, "Hey, this is great. We can use the media to steer our people." And it's nothing new. It was just that this, the printed press and the radio, was coming out at the time, but the printed press was nowhere as big as, it was like the internet exploding to us. That's what happened in the early 1900s when the typeset printer came out. They were able to actually, print up a lot more material and feed the mind. Only 150 years ago in this country, 60 to 70% of the country couldn't even read. So, it's a huge. We've made a huge step and a huge, advancement in technology. but the actual, human race hasn't really advanced that much from an awakening perspective. It's still just the sort of the prehistoric beast that it always was. And the technology has moved much farther than I think that it's like putting a tool in an animal's hand. A lot of these, look how people use their smartphones. A lot of them don't really, they just make phone calls with them. And to me, it's one of the most advanced in communications and intelligence collection devices I've ever seen. Some of the applications on there that I use are really intelligence collection applications. Things like LinkedIn, even things like Banjo. These applications can show you connections to other people and show you even geolocations of other people that you can use from an intelligence perspective. And they're open source applications that are available to everybody today. But not everybody's going to use a smartphone the same way.
Well, for the record, Scott, between you and me, I don't have any smartphone, cell phone, or anything, so nobody's mapping or doing a GPS on my location.
Yeah, but I understand that. But from a perspective on using technology to basically collect information, it is a tremendous tool to do that. For the other people that are using the like applications. For example, if you look at LinkedIn and you see some of the caliber of people that use LinkedIn, or even Facebook, if you're sitting at a computer right now, look for a guy named Uzi Arad. Is Uziarad, for example. Uzi Arad used to be the national security advisor to Netanyahu, but he has a Facebook account. And on his Facebook account, he has connections to individuals. And here he is, one of the lead national security advisors, but he allows you to see who he's connected to on Facebook. So obviously, a guy like me, I went and documented all that, and I keep track of what he does. And he's the kind of guy that I like to watch. He's one of thousands that I like. And that's the kind of information that's available to us today, sitting, at our computers and on our smartphones. So I find that to be a tremendous advancement for the average guy. It's like a guy who's got a ham radio, taking him out of the Stone Age.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Very true. Okay, well, this is all a little overwhelming. Where are we on a timeline in your life right now?
Well, right now I'm trying to do some stuff with some folks that I've worked with in the past. We've looked into doing the types of things that you're doing, because we find that the communications platforms are so advanced now, and the audiences are growing at an exponential rate. The kind of exposure of the chicanery in mainstream media. You've got some great programs that have come out that have really pulled back the curtain. You've got some press that's come out with Snowden that's brought back some of the real whistleblowers from the past, like William Binney, and you've got folks like all these individuals that Jeremy Scahill, who's come out, and there's a lot more individuals that are working independently in the media industry that are exposing information that was really never made available to the general public, and the general public is feeding on that and moving to that. I've seen the audience grow exponentially in the last 3 to 4 years, whereby it was a very slow growth. A lot. I'll give you an example. This Tea Party Occupy movements that we had at a position in this country, where those were the two grandiose movements in my lifetime. I wasn't around during Woodstock in the '60s. I was only an elementary school kid. I was born in '62, so I didn't have the experience of seeing that kind of dissidence growing up. There was a little period when I went to a school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where my father was getting his master's degree. But it was nothing more than driving past the campuses and seeing all the hippies, smoking some weed or something like that. But aside from that, everything pretty much that I saw when I was growing up was fairly an environment that was pretty. Everybody was pretty in line with the government. Everybody trusted the government. Everybody trusted the news. There was not a lot of people questioning that. There were people doing it in the 80s. I started to see it in the 80s, and I still had my my reservations about thinking that everything could be as bad. But now, after the late 80s, what I saw with the whole North program, and then going through the 90s with this, and then the last 10 to 15 years, it's just...
Ollie North. You're referring to Ollie North?
Ollie North, yeah. This was that whole Iran-Contra component, and just to see and know what was going on in the background versus what's been told, and then to see what they've done to Libya, to see what they've done to Iraq, to see what they've done. I mean, it's just one right after the other. It's just unbelievable dishonesty and just incredible. The banking failure of 2008, the SNL failure in the 80s. Just one right after the other, and nobody is held accountable. So that's what really, I've been spending a lot of time, trying to find individuals. There's great writers out there, that don't get any billing in the New York Times or the Washington Post or any of the mainstream media environments. And you look at these individuals that are getting mainstream media exposure, and it makes me suspicious of them. I mean, I got guys, there was a group whereby the Cato Institute, for example. The Cato Institute is very closely tied to the Thomson-Reuters type of infrastructure. And when you look at the media, even Jim Morrison said this, and I totally agree with him. He said, if you control the media, you control the mind. And it's absolutely true. And when you get the Cato Institute tied in with the Thomson-Reuters guys, they're actually writing a proposal this week on how to negotiate getting Snowden back in the country. So when you've got somebody that high working on your behalf, it makes me very suspicious of Snowden that somebody would be working on his behalf to help him get back in the country.
Well, hey, just to jump in here real quick, I understand that they captured some son of a Russian MP or something of this nature that was involved in some sort of subterfuge, and they're discussing trying to make some sort of a trade.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah, it sounds pretty nefarious. I hope the Russians don't do it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Hey, listen, before we really dive into the fun stuff and what have you, there's still a few more questions that I want to ask. Now, you've been on RT. Tell me a little bit about. You've been on hundreds of other networks, usually in Europe, Russia, etc. Can you tell us about some of these networks you've been on, the sort of information that they were bringing you on to talk about, the different languages you speak, and what it is that I'm just really curious what it is they come to you for.
Well, see, I got really lucky through social networking and things like Twitter and things like LinkedIn and Facebook. I was able to network with these guys and see that their connections were realistic. And to be honest with you, Ali Mohammed, he's the son of the largest arms dealer that we were dealing with in Afghanistan during the Afghan War, and I knew his father. I found the son through social networking on Facebook. And he was working for the Afghan government, basically as a liaison for the American intelligence and foreign intelligence, and on the information system side. So that was pretty interesting, working in that environment and doing that. seeing that how that could evolve. And so that evolved into working into Pakistani intelligence, working into Egyptian intelligence, working into the Iraqi theater, and just all kinds of different theaters you could work into and build relationships with individuals. And on doing so, a lot of the dialogues that I was having on the social networking side, I met some individuals who are already doing these kinds of interviews. And so I was able to work my way into some of the programs. And, oddly, some of them were one of the programs, El Jihad Television out of Lebanon, for example. El Jihad, it's an Iraqi television station that broadcasts out of Beirut. And one of the girls that works there, she went to school in Princeton University. And what's interesting to understand about these schools are Rhodes Scholar schools, not just Princeton, but many of them are Rhodes Scholar schools for the CIA. And so she studied under Friedrich Hitz. If you look up Friedrich Hitz, he's teaching at a law school now in Virginia. But at the time, he was teaching in Princeton University. And as soon as she finished studying, her first job was to go work for Al Jazeera, which is basically a Western puppet newspaper out of Qatar, because Qatar is where we headquarter, the British and the Americans headquarter in the Middle East. So this puppet organization, even when it came out, Al Jazeera, I thought it was real. I thought they had better news. Like, a lot of people will say BBC's got better news than the United States. Well, it's just got more content. It's not any more honest. And Al Jazeera is the same thing. And she was working for Al Jazeera in 2011 during the uprisings in Egypt. And so that was her first job after leaving a school, Princeton, studying under a seasoned 35-year veteran at CIA, right? And now here she is interviewing me on a show out of Lebanon that's an Iraqi television station operating out of Lebanon. I mean, if it's an Iraqi television station, we were controlling at the time, that was right about the time that Maliki took over. And Maliki, although he wasn't really the puppet that we really wanted, we wanted somebody else, he was still a good enough puppet where we could get away with anything we wanted, when it came to, communications and controlling the narrative on Iraqi television networks. So she was working at this television network in 2012 and 13. And she was interviewing me, and I was going up against, generals in the Lebanese military. And I have to be honest with you, most people don't realize how close the Lebanese military is with the American military. You always hear this, horrible thing about Hezbollah. The propaganda that you hear in the news is how bad Hezbollah is. But if you asked anybody, tell me some things about Hezbollah. How large is Hezbollah? And nobody could tell you. Nobody really knows. I mean, it's a force of under 10,000 troops.
Hey, I got a question for you, Scott.
Sure.
I just want to get your opinion on something that I've come to the conclusion. Do you believe Hamas was created by Mossad?
Well, so the thing is that to say it like that, no. I mean, Hamas is.
Let me rephrase that.
Mossad?
Would you say that the CIA is to ISIS what Hamas is to, or Mossad is to Hamas?
Well, it wasn't quite that blatant, no. But I would say the CIA and Mossad had their fingers in the pie of Hamas. They weren't in total control. One thing that people need to understand is that you're never in total control, but you can affect the outcome. By that I mean, if you see two people fighting and you give one guy a knife and the other guy a gun, you can determine the outcome of that. And so that's really the it's the Gerard Lewis sort of fourth generation warfare tactic, whereby it's Sang Tzu's, it's basically an extension of Sang Tzu's enemy of my enemy. And so that's really where they've gone, is they've said, okay, if we can take this faction and pin this faction against this faction, let's get in and let's help these guys. So there's an insistence going on. And those assistants, and then there's also infiltrators. There's people that are obviously, interested in, selling their soul for whatever it is that they're getting paid. So there's a lot of folks that are basically able to, be manipulated because of they're basically working for the money.
Hey, Scott, listen, I got to jump in here real quick. We've got probably a little bit less than 2 minutes before the music comes and we go into our break.
Okay.
And I want to remind everybody that if you'd like to join us during the next hour, the phone line, if you don't have it written down and memorized by now, for Studio A is 347-688-2902. Our guest tonight is Scott Rickard, former intelligence linguist and analyst. Scott, are you still working with the NSA? I think you said.
No. I don't think I'd ever get a clearance again, to be honest with you.
Okay. Well, I don't think
I qualify.
Once you start appearing on Al Jazeera and RT, they probably kind of.
Well,
that, huh?
I've been mostly on television programs out of Tehran. And then I've done the Lebanese ones and then the Pakistani ones. And then, to be honest with you, some of these guys in Pakistan, I really feel for those guys because those guys have been manipulated the longest by the British. And they've really been under the thumb of the British longer than anybody else over there.
Wow. We have a lot to talk about for sure. Anyway, listen. I want to thank everybody that's with us. This is a good show so far, and I think the second hour is going to be a lot of fun too. And I'm doing my best to hang in here, and I got to tell you, I'm feeling a little bit better now since we started. So it's not thinking about the cat so much. But anyway. Wow. I want to remind everybody before we go into break, you're going to be hearing music any minute, that we are listener-supported radio. If you are enjoying the show, please consider donating something. Anything is helpful, and we appreciate everything. Scott, before we're going to have a break here real quick. You don't really have any kind of a website or anything. Do you want to recommend that people maybe send you a thing on Facebook so they can at least follow you?
I'd say definitely follow on Facebook, but the best thing you're going to do is look for the
guys
that
I post
from.
Yep. There's our music, so go ahead and mute your microphone. Everybody, we'll be back in about 4 or 5 minutes. Please return. We'll be right back.
Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
The finder of lost children and missing persons. Monique Lassan. Surveilling civil and criminal investigations. I investigate.
I am the chosen one.
Do not underestimate the power of good, and do not dismiss the strength of the child.
Yes, every Wednesday evening on Revolution Radio, come join our very own I-Investigatrix, Monique Lassan, with her private I-X-Files.
So you're the finder of lost children?
Private I-X-Files, every Wednesday from 10 to midnight Eastern, Studio B, on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
I realize it's very hard for you to take in. But is your destiny to find the golden child?
Listen in to Journeys with JP, Tuesdays on Revolution Radio at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, with a variety of guests, each giving their unique perspective on their journey through to the now. Journeys offers you, the listener, a chance to share that perspective. Join me, JP, on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern on Revolution Radio, simulcast with Wolf Spirit Radio.
Every Tuesday evening on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, we present our goddess spiritual warrior, Kathy Bilski.
I command. I call to the architect of the universe's divine creators and ask for permission to quantum leap the world in all life forms on all planes and dimensions, seen and unseen, connected with planet Earth, to let us go beyond our known potential into the greatest unknown golden age the universes and worlds and all planets have ever experienced.
Kathy teaches the spiritual truth so that you may create a better life and be able to make positive changes for yourself and for the planet. She helps us remember that we are not powerless, but very creative spiritual beings having an Earth experience. Time to quantum leap into the age of divine enlightenment and let Kathy provide you with the tools of knowledge you need to awaken spiritually. That's the Quantum Leap Show. Let Light Unite every Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern on Revolution Radio, Studio B.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Did you ever feel that things were not quite right? That everything was just ever so slightly askew?
Do you have, to paraphrase Morpheus, a splinter in your mind?
If you're interested in hearing the latest information about UFOs, the paranormal,
ancient cultures and structures,
monatomic elements,
longevity,
fantastic discoveries in science,
downloaded to your brain,
then tune into us. Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Mackie.
And we are Shiny Side Out, Sundays 2 to 4 a.m. Eastern. See you then.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Most guys freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
Your body's filled with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. Your heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting to danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio. Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to the second half of the Stephen D. Kelley Show. I am your host, Stephen D. Kelley Show. I have my producer, Sean Bell, here with me tonight, who I want to give some props to because he always does such a good job My guest tonight is Scott Rickard, Rickard. He is a former intelligence analyst, NSA insider, lots of valuable information. This is his first time on Revolution Radio, and I want everybody to give him a big welcome. We are going to open up the phone lines, and Scott, I'm getting a little feedback from you. If you could cancel that.
How's that?
That's great, thank you. Again, the call-in number is 347-688-2902, and if you would like to join us via Skype, you need to use the Freedom Screen Skype number, or you need to, if I'm connected to you, you need to connect with Sean Bell, my producer, and he will bring you in. We have a couple people that would like to join us. It looks like Johnny Webb over in London is on the line, and he wants to come in and probably say something, so we'll see if he gets in here. Before we get back to my guest, I want to remind everybody once more, we are listener-supported radio. We do need your donations. Anything that there is no such thing as a pathetic donation. It's all very useful, and it is all very, very much appreciated. We do this every month. Again, I promised to everybody I was going to plug my book here. I'm going to do this real quick to get it over with. But my book is Cities Under the Plane. It is available on Amazon Kindle. If you're interested, it's about 185 pages. It goes for $7. And if you want to know what I'm all about and why I'm doing this, read that book. There's a lot of valuable information in there. And we were talking about whistleblowers. That's what I am. That book has all that information that I blew the whistle on. So, Scott, you're going to have to read my book, too, one of these days. And I promise I'll read yours when you write one. Is that fair?
Fair enough.
I'll send you a copy. Anyway. All right, what else? Okay, also, join our chat. We have a great chat. Join our Facebook page, www.facebook.com/Freedom Slips. And that's about it for what I need to tell you guys. So, tomorrow, real quick, I'm going to be on Terry Joyce's show at 1 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific time. And Terry Joyce is another host here on Revolution Radio, and her show is called Freedom of Joyce. And I'm looking forward to that. I always have a good time when we get together. So tomorrow morning, that's tomorrow morning. I'm going to have to get up. Well, it's morning for me, 11 o'clock. So anyway. All right. Where were we, Scott, when we left?
Well, I was basically just trying to sum it up to say that, a lot of these television networks that we're on, obviously out of foreign countries, and obviously, there are manipulations. No foreign television network is free from any kind of, as well as domestic, is free from any kind of influence. They're all influenced. To kind of sum that up, I went, I did a one show earlier this year when they started to manipulate Ukraine and overthrow the existing government and then put their puppets in place. When George Soros's crew was working alongside the notorious Victoria Nuland and the U.S. State Department to do their dirty work in Ukraine, I was doing a show out of Tehran, and it got picked up in Russia. And when that show got picked up in Russia, they basically ran it pretty good there, and then I actually made the front page of the Russian equivalent to USA Today. And so the Russian second largest Russian television network, VGTRK, contacted me through Twitter and asked if they could come down and do an interview. And so they actually came to the house, and they spent about 6 hours at the house and did several hours of interviews. And basically I did some research on VGTRK and all the other different television networks, and come to find out they also have some notorious influences on their networks. And it was and I brought it to the attention of the individual that was basically not interested in talking about it. She basically said, "Look, if I bring that information up to my management, it could jeopardize my job." And that was what was that wasn't made a very good example for me. Here you got somebody who's interested in trying to share the truth, I thought, and I was trying to tell her a little bit about her network and some other networks in Russia. And she says, look, I said, I don't discount what you're telling me, but if I take that to my management, it would jeopardize my future. And that's kind of the same thing we deal with in the intelligence community here. If we find some damning things about our guys that we work with, if we go to start talking about it, it'll jeopardize our careers. So, it's just this. It's just because they're a different country doesn't mean they don't have the same problems. And it was interesting to me, and some of the things that I uncovered on the Russian television network with just a minimal amount of research was that there was massive amounts of foreign influence. There was massive amounts of individuals that were tied to American intelligence that were working within the Russian television networks. And there was ties into the financial markets that were, very, just like our corporate ownership of our television networks. So it was quite interesting. It was an interesting sort of exercise in analysis of Russian television influences.
Yeah, that's really an interesting insight. I don't think people really need to understand just how incestuous all of these organizations are. Listen, Scott, we've got two people that joined us. I've got my friend Johnny here from the UK and his friend Larry. So, Johnny, welcome. What's going on? What have you got to? You have a question for Scott?
I'm sorry, Scott. I don't mean to be rude. I've actually just joined in tonight, but I'm just flowing with it at the moment. I did bring Larry Kelley, who's another friend of mine. He wanted to ask a few questions, I'm sure, but I'll just sit on the sideline for the minute and listen to Scott if that's okay, Stephen.
All right, John, that's fine. Larry, welcome to the program. What have you got to say to Scott here?
I don't really even know. I came in the middle of it. I don't know what Scott was talking about.
Oh, you guys are just listening. You want to be flies on the wall. Is that it? Okay, I got it.
Sort of, but I have some interesting issues here about what's going on. I live in Pennsylvania, and I'm privy to some information where in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania, they're collecting Hummers, military Hummers, from Maine to South Carolina. They're bringing them up to Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. Some of these Hummers have 165 miles on it. They're cutting them up into 3 pieces, and the scrap is being given to this company called Trident. And this guy's making a lot of money on these brand new Hummers. Now the government's broke. Now my beef is, I'm a veteran. I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years. I had I had come down with some bad cancer. Then I've been pretty much cancer free for 4 years now, thank God. It ruined my throat, my voice. But now I'm using the VA hospitals, and I owe them thousands of dollars because of this treatment. Because they have no money. Yet they're giving away all this stuff. There's a Navy base that just shut down somewhere, Abubu, Africa or something. And all the supplies, all the surplus from this base is coming into the hands of this Trident. Now I know this because it's all being staged all around me here in this neighborhood. I'm talking about thousands of feet of steel pipe worth a lot of money. Big air conditioners, portable. They run on diesels. I don't know much about this stuff. Heavy equipment, bulldozers. All this stuff is being given to this Trident company. Now this guy, I don't know his name that owns the company, but him and this man, Joe Eichholz, he owns the sewer company here, and he's always getting his fingers in something. Now I know this guy, Joe, personally.
Oh, Larry, listen, I'm sorry to cut you off here, but I was really, this is a really valuable guest here, and I'd really rather that you called back during one of our roundtables because that's more of an appropriate platform for this. I have a roundtable Tuesday and Wednesday, actually it'd be Wednesday and Thursday. I'm Pennsylvania, you're on East Coast time, so the roundtables, if you're up that late, are at 2 a.m., but that's every Wednesday and Thursday morning. And I'd love to have you on the show to discuss anything you want. But right now, if possible, could you please keep it directed to questions for Scott or something pertaining to what we've been discussing?
I really didn't catch a lot of what you guys were talking about. So
Well, then do me a favor and just stand by.
Sure.
Let me get back to the guest. If you could, just for the purposes of sound quality, mute your microphone until we you've got something to say. Also, you've got your chat window down there. If you want to alert me that there's something that you want to bring up, go ahead and let me know, and I will call upon you. Is that okay?
Sure, that's great, buddy.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott, thank you again for your patience. It's, there's so many areas. I've done a lot of shows about Syria. I've done a lot of shows about the Ukraine. That issue is not going away. What's going on in Israel right now is certainly extremely topical. And the very fact that the United States is funding a slaughter in the Ukraine and Gaza at the same time is certainly something that we should all be very aware of. Clearly, you join me a lot on the Facebook. I've noticed with discussing the issues regarding Israel. Is there any axe that you'd like to grind right now? Something that you want to bring up that we should focus on that you feel particularly passionate about?
Well, to be honest with you, the Israeli thing is tied to a lot of the financial issues that we're up against. It's tied to a lot of the foreign policy that we're up against. You want to run for office in this country, they'll be lining up in droves for the 2016 election, whereby everybody will be falling over themselves to get the AIPAC nomination. And I think what we're going to see is you're going to see a build-up between now and some sort of tragic event's going to happen, and everybody's going to want to fall on their sword for Israel, and whoever basically fillets Israel the most will be the one that becomes our next candidates for our major congressional and obviously eventually the presidential races. And that's unfortunate that there is that much influence on this small little country and this small group of individuals that control our foreign policy, our finance, which is basically upside down, and yet we are going further and further in debt, fighting these countries that we didn't have a beef with. We didn't have a beef with Libya. We didn't have a beef with Syria, and we've created a nightmare over there. Just on Memorial Day, you had Susan Rice admit that we've given $1.7 billion in funding in the war against Syria. I mean, that's only about half of what we've given, but still, $1.7 billion is a tremendous amount of money for a very small armies that continually we recruit and send in there. There's been about 150,000 people killed, and of those people, obviously, tens of thousands of them were insurgents that have come in waves and been recruited and trained and nourished and actually given rest and relaxation in and out of Jordan, in and out of Iraq, in and out of the Kurdish mountains with the Kurdish regional government, in and out of Turkey. And all of these things are happening, under our watch. We've got drones flying every day. We've got communications guys monitoring the whole thing. So when they say, oh, we were surprised by ISIS, don't believe that for a minute. We built it. We trained it. There's this escalation. Everything's firing on multiple pistons right now. The Israelis are going and basically having the small amount of arsenal that the Hamas had. Hamas only had a few hundred of the 300 series Syrian rockets. They're going to run out of those sometime soon. The Qassam rockets that they have are pretty much useless, so they'll be depleted. And then Syria has given up their only weapon that they had as defense, the chemical weapons. So they're pretty much defenseless now. And now they've got a third army that they can use to take out anybody that doesn't do what they want. And Maliki's on that list now. You've got the Kurdish regional government who will do the bidding for the Turks and for the Americans and the Israelis and the Jordanians. You've got and the Saudi Arabians. You've also got the all these mercenaries that's all they know. I mean, these guys are, there's 3,000 of the ISIS troops out of 10,000 are somewhere in the neighborhood of about half are foreigners. I mean, and 3,000 of those are from Europe and the United States. So these are guys that know what they're doing. They've been in multiple wars. They've been in multiple scenarios through Mali, through Libya. You take one guy, this guy, I can't remember, Mahari, or not Mahari, I can't remember his name right now, but he led the forces in Libya. And this guy was probably one of the most powerful guys in the CIA. He'd been a CIA asset, Libyan, Irish passport. He'd been working as an asset for the CIA, and he's the guy that's gone into Mali helping lead forces, into Libya to lead forces, into Syria to lead forces. These guys train other people, and that's all their jobs. These are dogs of war. That's all they know how to do. They've been fighting wars in Chechnya. They've been fighting wars in Afghanistan, and these are individuals that
Georgia.
In Georgia. These are individuals. The Georgian war was very small too, by the way. There was only about 2,000 troops that the Russians came to put back, but they made it such a big deal in American news, and most people don't realize that the president that the West put in place during the Rose Revolution was this guy was a young kid who trained in Kiev, and then he trained in the United States, became a lawyer, went back to Tbilisi, and at the ripe age of 27 became a member of parliament, and at the seasoned age of 30 he was the Minister of Justice. And then he was the guy that took over for Edward Shevardnadze, who, by the way, passed away this week. Shevardnadze, if you don't know, was the foreign minister for Gorbachev and the first president of Georgia after it split away from the Soviet Union. And so here you have, a country that was completely manipulated, just like they're doing to Ukraine, by a young kid. Who ended up, at 30 years old, the Minister of Justice, and then was the president that deposed Edward Shevardnadze, who was a real diplomat. This guy was actually somebody who understood the world and was probably, one of the better diplomats that came out of the Soviet Union. And we still deposed that guy because it was so key for the taking over that Caspian Basin. And using that for I don't know if you're familiar with Graham Fuller. Graham Fuller was the CIA operative who helped overthrow that Dagestan and Chechnya and that whole area for Georgia over there, and secured the rights to some of that Caspian Basin oil that comes through Turkey now and gets into Europe and other places around the world.
Kind of a Charlie Miller, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's what we run into is we run into a long, drawn out, scenario that, Israel is just a component, and it's a component of the actual arsenal, but it has such strong ties and has such strong dirt on everyone, from, back in the, even in the early 1900s. This whole concept of creating Israel and this whole concept had been pushed on the United States. Alison Weir wrote a great book. I can't remember the name of the book, but it's something like Against Our Better Judgment. It talks about the history of Zionism and the influence that it had on the United States politics. I mean, the first flag for Israel was actually developed in Boston. The national flag, and so that's the kind of influence, and the kinds of influence they had on our financial system helped us basically invest in the overthrow of the czars through the Bolshevik. The Americans and the British and the French all funded that war against the Tsars. So that's the kind of history that we're talking about and we're dealing with when we talk about Israel. There's just extremely close ties into all the political, financial, and military infrastructure, not just in the United States, but also throughout Europe, through those ties that were made.
I'm surprised you haven't mentioned the Rothschilds.
Well, there's the Rothschilds. Were also some folks that funded it out of France. But the point is that the Rothschilds branched out, and they branched out into 5 different nations. They had a great banking infrastructure, and then when Napoleon was at war with the British, the Rothschilds were very effective at manipulating the British stock market, and they basically took over half of the British Empire's wealth. And that basically tied the British Empire to the Rothschild banks. And by the way, the Rothschilds are 50% owners of Goldman Sachs. So, that's who control American finance, in and out of the Federal Reserve. So that, yes, the Rothschild banking infrastructure for sure. It's a small group, started in Germany and France, and now obviously very influential for the IMF, World Bank, and the Paris Club, which is another very influential group most people don't know about. When you start talking about the financial manipulation, definitely money makes the world go around, and it has a huge impact on our foreign policy. It has a huge impact on our military policy, as well as and we've really become the conquistadors. We are the outsourced war machine. Now, all that money that we've borrowed from that banking infrastructure to build that. So we've basically borrowed money to build their army, which is really, really sick. And it's I'm hoping that the American people will wake up and stand up in numbers. But we live in probably one of the most over-entertained, misinformed, and ambivalent societies that's ever existed on the face of this earth. The bread and circus of the Roman times, we put that to shame. People are more interested in their gaming infrastructure. They're interested in their sports. They're interested in their self-satisfaction. There's very few people that have a serious sort of agenda and understand it, because a lot of people will say, well, I'm just one person, what can I do about it? There's nothing I can do. Well, if 10% of the United States population said the opposite and said, you know what, I'm not going to take this anymore, it'd be enough. 30 million, 35 million people would be plenty to make have a huge effect on the what would be a magnificent change. Now, we really haven't had a change like that since the Commonwealth Wars in the 1600s. There really hasn't been a real revolution. Even the American Revolution against the British, it really wasn't much of a change. We went right back to them in the early to mid 1800s, and we really haven't had sovereignty since the 1850s. So, and that's a fact. Our vote really hasn't counted in our lifetimes, and I really don't think it's counted since the late 1800s.
Well, I'll tell you, the only thing that really does make a difference anymore, as long as courts don't overturn the decision, is when we vote on these, what do they call them? When we, like, for instance, legalizing marijuana and things like that, popular vote. It seems like the only thing that the popular vote is any good for anymore is some of these propositions that come up on occasion.
From a state's perspective, yeah, when you talk about the states' rights and those types of things, I agree with that. But from a federal perspective, the federal government has there's no accountability. The federal government basically operates with impunity. They're never held accountable.
Listen, we're having I was just checking and the stats here, and we got a really large audience tonight. So thank you, Scott. I'm very happy to say that I promised you a large audience, and we have a very large audience. I'm not going to tell you the actual number, but let's suffice it to say it's really big.
Good.
So we haven't set a record, but you're doing really good tonight, so I appreciate that. Once again, though, if you want to join us, and not just to be a fly on the wall like Johnny here, but if you'd like to join us to say something to Scott, to welcome him or ask him a question, since he has such a wealth of knowledge, please call us right now at 347-688-2902. We've only got about 30 minutes or less in the show, and of course, when we have a good show like this, it just flies, and it is flying right now. So, call us now. Don't wait. You're a lot of people out there listening. I'm sure you're thinking about it. Don't be chicken. We're happy to have you here. So call in right now or Skype us at Freedom Screen. Go on, Scott. What else you want to add?
Well, so I guess to kind of sum that up, what ends up happening is you have an agenda that's driven by mostly think tanks, mostly financial influences, and obviously their ties into the intelligence communities and the militaries, across those different countries. So those are the decision makers. Those are the guys that are going to the meetings, and those are the guys that the politicians look to actually say, what should we do? Our politicians don't even know what questions to ask. When you go to them and you say, hey, this is something I'd like you to, they say, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you about that. You'll have and somebody from the CIA or something like that. I've gone to Senator Nelson's office and Rubio's office and talked to them, and they said, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you about that. If I talk to you about that, I've got to bring in the intelligence because you're talking about intelligence issues. These guys sit on the intelligence committees, and so they won't even have the conversations with you, which is, in my opinion, a violation of the Constitution. You're not supposed to have the intelligence guys basically telling the politicians what they can and can't talk about. It's just unbelievable. So no, I think everything's kind of gone upside down. When you ask the question, what's the Americans have been, at war my whole lifetime. I was born during the Vietnam War, and there hasn't been a time that we haven't been at war with somebody. And certainly the most recent wars have been horrific. Even during the Vietnam Wars, and I think it started in 1964, 50 years ago, right about now, we started bombing Laos. We bombed for, I think it was somewhere around probably 6 years, something like that, and 7 years, and we dropped over 2 million tons of our.
Oh boy, what happened there?
I don't know. Where'd I lose you?
I think we're back. Sorry about that.
That scared me, Sean.
It just dropped out. I'm sorry about that.
Well, I'm not blaming you. I guess whenever we have a really, really good guest like this, we get an attack. I think we got attacked here, huh? Anyway, hey, it looks like we had somebody join us important here that I want to welcome. Bruce, are you here?
Yes, I don't see how I'm important, though.
You're important to me, but I welcome you here. I'm assuming that you joined us because you're enjoying the show and you want to say hello to Scott.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you very much, Scott, for coming on the show. You have a natural broadcaster's voice.
Oh, you're too kind.
That's true. It is true. Yeah.
Well, my question is, very quickly, why do you do what you do? Why do some people go through the system like you do and break the party line? And sort of turn 180 degrees around? Is it a question of conscience? Do you come to some kind of, spiritual atrophy? Can you just not live with it at a conscience level anymore? Like, what is the process, if you can let us into that?
That's a good question. It really wasn't. It wasn't. It's definitely not conscience. I've actually told Stephen the same thing. I was kind of more like Klinger when I was in the military. I really didn't care much for it. I grew up as a military brat and wasn't really what you would call gung ho. I didn't really, if you wanted my respect, you had to earn it. I wasn't the kind of guy that would just give it to anybody. So I was disillusioned, I guess, and I kind of felt like, what a bunch of liars, So maybe it's, I guess it's just out of. I'll show you, I'll do my best to expose you type thing. And I can't believe you guys have been, basically fooling us. I go back now to the Encyclopedia Britannica. We are all raised on that as if it was the truth. And, looking into the history of something like that now, and with the access to information, that book was written in Cambridge University, and here we are, basically being raised on, a British version of history. It certainly wasn't called the Encyclopedia Americanica, and it's not very factual. It's misleading, and it was the most printed material of the early 1900s, believe it or not. It was the most volumes of books ever printed at the time in history, because it was basically sold out of Chicago from a British immigrant who made so much money. When he made all this money, he basically tried to buy the London Times, but because he was not a lord, he was not authorized to buy the newspaper. So that ought to tell you something. If you're able to own the media, you have to be part of that gang and to learn those kind of things. And that's the kind of, the American school system was actually based on the Prussian military in the 1850s by Horace Mann. And they did it because the Prussians knew how to make people more loyal to their government. And that's what, when you learn those things, you go, hey, this we've all been basically born into and bred into a false, sense of reality, and, turned into these sort of nationalistic tools for the empire that we happen to live in. And that goes with most countries that, are part of the allies, the IMF allies. And when you look at the historical wars and you take a step back and you say, well, wait a second, who were the allies, 500 years ago? And it's kind of the same allies that run the IMF are the ones that are still keeping all the BRICS countries, down below the standard of living of the NATO countries. Because if you analyze the GDP of the BRICS countries, they're artificially kept lower based upon the control of the financial markets of the NATO market. So those are the kinds of things when you start to look through those things and they say, hey, I gotta let other people know what I'm finding out. Mm-hmm. Because that's what ends up happening, is that you find out all these tidbits and you do your own research, and the reaching out. And I've met some of the greatest intellectual individuals over the last 3 or 4 years, through these social networking platforms, and then to tie them in and to see who they talk to and watch their conversations. There's so much more to learn and so much more to share, and that's why I use the social networking platforms, because the groups and the audiences are such larger and more comprehensive audiences. Twitter's not as good of a platform to do that on because it's too two-dimensional. But Facebook is really good, and LinkedIn is really good because it's all, these guys are all professionals on LinkedIn side, and it's a fairly elite network of individuals you'll find on LinkedIn versus Facebook. Facebook, you find some of the real fringe stuff, but even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yes.
I mean,
great line.
So.
I first heard that in With Nail and I, George Harrison's first film. Even a stopped clock is right twice a day.
They used to say that to me all the time.
So my second and last question would be the corollary or the antipode of the first. And I'm very curious about the kind of individual consciousness that goes into an intelligence operative, because I think it's one of the things that we need to understand. And so you have some people who go through the process. I would imagine that if you're in the NSA or the CIA for 10 years or longer, you come to full consciousness of what's really going on. You can't live a lie and say, I'm a patriot.
That's not true.
Okay, so you've intuited my question. I don't even have to ask it, so I'll just go on mute. And what I want to...
No.
Okay,
go ahead.
Okay, so where do they get this class of people that can do the really dirty work? I mean, they must...
That's a great question, actually.
Yeah.
I like that. So here's a lot of the guys in my offices were Mormon, and they recruited them out of Provo.
Oh my God!
These guys, they don't drink. They don't even drink. I'm sorry, they don't drink. They don't smoke.
I had heard rumors that there's a disproportionate number of Mormons in the CIA now.
There is a disproportionate number at NSA as well. They were some of the best linguists because they would travel around the world doing their missionary work, and they were very trustworthy. These guys didn't do anything. I mean, they wouldn't even drink a cup of coffee. So they were easy to manipulate. They were very obedient. They did not question authority. And that's just part of what that's the kind of person that they're looking for. I was the complete opposite of that. They just like these. I was surprised that that wasn't thrown out earlier. I got that question a lot. So it's and then there's gung ho guys. There's guys that think that they're actually part of the Crusades.
Crusader rabbits.
Yeah, the Crusader rabbits. I mean there's guys. There's Nazi youth. There's guys that just want power. And they stick around, and those are the guys that stay. By the way, a lot of the guys that stay are the really like insane, like power hungry type guys. A lot of the guys I knew that were in the 80s are still there, and what's interesting, I still am connected to them on LinkedIn. None of them, very few of them, will even talk to me. None of them will answer my emails, but some of them will talk face to face. But nobody will use. They all know emails are completely tracked. Phone calls. This thing is recorded by Microsoft, provided to NSA on request. This show is everything is recorded that goes through Skype. It's that's one of the reasons that Microsoft bought it. It's very lucrative dealing with the government.
Yeah.
So and
they've got all your dirty pictures.
Yeah.
Great answers, Scott. I'll listen to the rest of the show off Skype. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us, Bruce. I really appreciate it. Scott, I've got a few questions for you, but real quick, I want to welcome Justin Time. One of our producers has joined us, and I'm sure he has something interesting to say. What's up, Justin?
Hey, Steve, turn off the webcam.
Yeah, no kidding, huh?
Great input, Scott. And I just want to say, it seemed to me as I watched it take place back in 2001, the CIA bought, paid for, armed, and trained this army. They decided to call it Al-Qaeda after they put this image of a boogeyman together called a terrorist, because I still don't believe it's real. In fact, they're saying you and I are terrorists. What I saw and still think is that the small army that they put together is still together. It's just getting larger and larger and larger, and people were getting a little bored and like, oh, yeah, with the name Al-Qaeda. Do you believe ISIS is the same army they started about 13 years ago, and they just needed to give it a new name to give it some oomph?
Yeah, super boogeyman.
Well, I totally agree with that. What happens is that they've got individuals that they've obviously recruited along the way. They recruited a lot of these individuals out of Afghanistan, to fight against the Russians. They've recruited individuals obviously out of Thailand during the Vietnam Wars. They recruited individuals all throughout Africa. So, yeah, they have a huge network of individuals that they can use. They've also worked with Central American and South American forces, individuals that they've trained and they've learned to trust and grown to trust. So, yeah, they have a large network of mercenaries that they can choose from. And obviously, some of their more trustworthy troops that are, would be considered, let's just say, colonels and generals in this mercenary force. These individuals are 100% reliable, and they've been around for anywhere between 15 and 25 years. These are very seasoned individuals with excellent ties to other individuals that they know they can trust. And are some of the same people involved with ISIS that were involved with Al-Qaeda? Absolutely. And a lot of the individuals that they're tying with now are tying with the Kurdish regional government that's been actually working very close with foreign intelligence, Mossad, MI6, French, American intelligence, not only against Saddam Hussein, but also against Assad out of the mountain ranges that border, Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. So you have a group of individuals there that are heavily trusted in this group called the Kurdish Regional Government. And if you see, there's been no real threats coming from that group, and that group is starting to pin itself against Maliki, and that group was already trying to pull away from Iraq earlier this year due to some payment issues on the oil infrastructure coming out of Iraq. And Maliki has been on the outs since around 2010, 2011. And I personally think they allowed Maliki to stay so that they would have an opportunity to go against him in the future, because they knew that he would be an enemy of the North. They knew that he would, because he's Shiite, and he's very racist against Sunni. So they knew that he would be a good guy. So I think that they could have replaced him 4 or 5 years ago. He's been around for about 8 or so. And I think that they kept him because they said, we can use him later. I think they're smarter than we are. That's the thing is that these guys know more than we know. And the fact is that if somebody thinks that they know what they're talking about, they've already thought this thing. It's like playing chess against a master. These guys, this is a very calculated group of individuals that have better information than us and have a much better financing than we have.
Hey, Scott, let me jump in here real quick with these questions. We're down to about, 13 minutes or so before we start hearing music, and I got to end the show, so I'm going to have to take over pretty quick. But first of all, my first question is, will you join us again next week?
Sure.
All right. Everybody in chat is really enjoying your information and your authenticity, and you're a very valuable guest, and I'm very happy to have found you on Facebook, and I'm looking forward to having you next week. So, great. Now, another question that came up earlier, but I wanted to save it because this is the sort of thing we kind of wrap things up with, and that is, do you have any recommendations, aside from the obvious that I'll probably talk about before the show's over, of what people can do, given the information that we've been supplying them? What do you recommend people should do to go out there and, what tools can you give us to use to work with what we've learned tonight?
Well, the best thing to do is, read everything you can get your hands on. I learned one thing a long time ago. You never believe everything you read, never believe everything anybody tells you, and you only believe about half of what you're able to figure out on your own. So it's like a puzzle. There's some great books out there. I started out, one of the first ones that started to open my eyes was James Bamford's The Puzzle Palace. It was written in the early 80s. I'd highly recommend that book. But there's been, hundreds of other books written. There's some great authors out there like James Bamford. There's, Alison Weir I mentioned earlier. There's a bunch of folks who, if you follow the threads on Facebook, you'll find, everybody out there, just so many guys like Chris Hedges, Paul Craig Roberts. There's just a lot of very smart individuals who are writing some incredible documents, but you have to read between the lines. There's also individuals that write in other countries where, some of the information they give you is factual, but a lot of it is opinionated, mixed in with the facts. So you have to read between the lines of some of those articles. For example, J.J. Goldberg wrote a very good article this week. He writes for the Daily Forward out of Tel Aviv. And it's got some very interesting information in it, but I don't agree with a lot of his opinion. But there is good information. So I read. If people always often say to me, "Oh, hey, why do you follow that guy? On Facebook? Why do you follow Rush Limbaugh on Facebook? Or why do you follow Rachel Maddow? Or all of these like talking heads." The Fox one, what's her name? Megyn Kelley. I was like, I follow anybody to see what they're saying, to see if what they're saying is correct. because then it gives me an opportunity to go and say, well, what other information can I find on this? And then I start talking to the people that I trust, and then I start like networking with the individuals, and then I put it out there, and people will correct me when I'm wrong, and then they'll show me where the right information is. So that dialogue, the more you dialogue with other individuals, you can find out information. So for example, what these social networks provide is that they combine SIGINT, human, comment, all these different intelligence methodologies, where they refer to it sort of like Magent is the way that the NSA calls it these days. It's sort of like a magical intelligence, where you can basically put all these other components together and put the pieces together, because the pieces are there. The problem is, if you're starting from scratch, you don't know what the actual puzzle is supposed to look like. So it's hard to have a picture of the puzzle when basically all the pieces are shades of gray, and you don't know how that piece of puzzle is supposed together. So it's a difficult, hundreds of thousands of pieces. But the more that you put research and time into it, the better it is. You'll be able to contribute and learn from the other individuals that are talking about it. That's what I found. I found that I've learned more, and I get better intelligence today than I got when I used to work for the agency off of open source intelligence and social networking platforms. There's that much good information out there that the government's spending hundreds of millions and billions of dollars trying to do the same thing that I'm doing in my house, to basically, and train guys to do what I can do. So, I won't go work for them because, first of all, I don't believe, unless they change their tune, but I won't go work for them unless, but they realize that, hey, this, you can do something with this. This is actually a useful tool. And they pay companies like Visible Technologies, for example. If you look into that one, it was invested in by In-Q-Tel. In-Q-Tel is a CIA venture capital arm that basically goes out and invests in technologies to do intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance and other activities in the intelligence communities. So what Visible does is it basically does surveillance, monitoring, and reporting on Twitter and Facebook and all these things. And so they realize that there's a valuable resource in these networks, and they have direct ties into these networks. Everything that we talk about, everything is that. And people say, well, the NSA is watching. I said, I hope they are. I hope there's some poor kid that's got his job that he's got to watch what I post.
Might learn something.
That bastard might learn something. So that's, who cares? I don't care about my privacy.
What I like to do, Scott, I used to, when I was under heavy surveillance back in the day, I used to just pick up my phone and blurt some bizarre thing into the phone just to screw with them.
Yeah.
Because it's a double-edged sword, It's like when they're out there collecting information, you control the information they collect. Give them what you want them to have.
No, I'm giving them what I'm learning, and they're welcome to it. The way I look at it is, I'm not trying to hide anything, and I'm not as worried about the privacy component, as everybody else is making a big. This whole Snowden privacy thing, that's just a joke to me. You go back to sleep, young man. Because that kid doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground right now. To be honest with you, he's not a very smart kid. He's either being taken for a ride or he's taking us for a ride.
Well, they do that with us youngsters. We're used that way. I got used, certainly. Hey, listen, we're almost out of time, but there's one question that I'm going to try to bring up, and hopefully you can address this relatively briefly. But Tony has been asking if you know anything about the secret space program and or UFO recovery teams.
No, we talked about that before the show a little bit. I'm not real familiar with that kind of stuff. Mine has all been technology driven, ISR based stuff, and it's really, I'm focused more on like monitoring and reporting on the open source intelligence community over the last I'd say since about 2007. The tools started to develop. Prior to that, there was the World Wide Web was pretty it was useful. But it wasn't as fluid as it is right now. I can tell you stories about I really don't know much about that kind of stuff, but I can tell you stories about the technology development If you look at like even the early 2000s, when they started to come out with more advanced technology, there were people that were telling me right before 2000 that the internet would never be used for financial transactions. These were Fortune 50 companies where I was trying to get them to use secure network connections across the internet to do financial transactions. They were telling me that it was too insecure that nobody would ever use the internet for that. I was like, are you kidding me? I said, everybody's going to use this. I was like, but that's what you were dealing with. You were dealing with, society that was, used to using the technology that they had. That's all that they wanted to do. So that's really, I spent my time mostly in the technical space, building systems and really analyzing systems, in large corporate networks and, large infrastructure type networks.
Okay, listen, we just hit our 2-minute warning, so I'm gonna take over. Okay, listen, everybody, I hope you've really enjoyed the show as much as I have. Scott has agreed to come back next week, so obviously this is going to continue, and I'm really looking forward to it. And I want to thank all of you that have been listening tonight. We've had some incredible numbers, and obviously I'm not going to mention them on the air. But I really appreciate it. So obviously there's a lot of people that are listening tonight that have not been here before. Thank you so much. If there's anything you can do to help us and support us financially, please visit our site support button on our main homepage. And the energy that I get from a show like this is really powerful. We're getting a little bit of feedback there, Scott. But I'm really excited to have you here, and I look forward to having you here back next week. And I want to thank everybody that called in, and I want to thank everybody in chat. But let's see, what else can I say? Tune in next week at the same time, and Scott will be joining us. And hopefully, I may have to have you come back again, Scott, because sometimes we do panels with other notable people such as yourself, and I think you might enjoy that also. So if you're willing and if you've got the time, I hope you become a regular, and I encourage my fellow hosts to get in touch with Scott here also, because if he's got the time, I would like to see you guys take advantage of his knowledge. So, any final words before we go into music here, Scott? Anything you want to leave us with?
Well, I'd say definitely use the social networking aspect. It's the best information I've ever seen. I cannot believe the amount of intelligence that I got in my pocket these days.
That's for sure. Yeah, don't be afraid to be a keyboard warrior on Facebook, because, it is a double-edged sword, and yes, they use it against us. They designed it to use it against us, but there's more of us than they are, and all we have to do is better at using it than them. So, there it is. That's the end of the show. Again, thank you, Scott. We'll see you next week. It was a fantastic show. Thank you, everybody that's listening. God bless you. Good night, and we'll see you all next week.